In 2025, I set a goal to read 52 books in the year, and I actually was able to read 53. I want to talk about why I set that reading goal in 2025, what my goal is in 2026, how I achieved the goal, and let you know which books I read that I recommend. The main reason I set a goal to read 52 books in 2025 was because sometimes I fall into reading slumps, and I thought having a goal would help me not to fall into those slumps. 52 books is roughly one book a week, so I thought that would give me something to work toward and keep me reading all year. Because the goal was about continuous reading and not quantity, I'm setting the same goal for 2026. When I'm consistently reading, it keeps my mind happy, it keeps me engaged with something other than screens, I have more to occupy my mind, and I have more inspiration. There are certain strategies I used to achieve this goal. One of the strategies was I alternated the length of the books I was reading. If I was reading a book that was very long, I alternated it with a book that was very short afterwards. This just gave me that quick dopamine hit of finishing a book after or before reading something that was very long. Sometimes I lose my attention on a book that's very long, even if I'm enjoying it. Reading a short book before and after kind of keeps me on the roll and keeps up the momentum. Reading a lot of long books in a row was a way that I fell into reading slumps before. Another thing I tried to do was alternate the genre of the books I was reading. I love reading fantasy, but again, I love reading epic fantasy, and a lot of times it's very long. So if I alternated it with something else that was shorter, like poetry or short stories, it really helped me to read consistently. Another thing I did to make sure that I was reaching my goal is to alternate the media types. This kind of helped me to always be reading because I don't always have time throughout the different seasons of the year to sit down and read a book. So I always make sure to have an audiobook going at the same time that I have a physical book. And sometimes I also have a book that's on my phone, on my Kindle app, so that I can read wherever I am or whatever I'm doing. The fourth strategy I used was to be okay with DNFing a book. If I wasn't enjoying it and it was really feeling like a chore to read it, I stopped reading the book, except for 2 books this year, which I'll mention that I should have DNF'd. And a fifth way that I made sure to read consistently throughout the year was to read with my kids. My kids are 9 and 11, and even though they're older and they can read themselves, we do have a habit of reading a book aloud at night. It gets them in a calm mood, and it helps them to read a book that they might otherwise not be able to hold their attention on, and we read it together. And it actually helps with their vocabulary, it helps with their listening skills. Another habit I have with my kids is listening to an audiobook on long car rides. With those 5 strategies, I was able to make sure that I was always working toward my goal of reading 52 books in the year. Now I want to go through the books that I read this year and give you a short synopsis of each and whether or not I would recommend them. So first I'm going to go through the books that I read with my kids this year. My kids and I listened to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Even though we own the physical copy, we did listen to this in the car. This book is a classic. It's about a group of children who discover a magic wardrobe that they go through to a magical land with magical creatures, and they have to defeat evil there. Many people know this story. It's also a movie. It's easy to understand why I highly recommend this if you have kids, reading it aloud or listening to the audiobook. We also read Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I read this one aloud to them at night. We had all seen the movie first, and we were very surprised by how many things were different than the movie, but the basic story is the same. This story is about a girl who is a little bit lost in her family, and she ends up being cursed by a witch to be an old lady, and she goes and ends up living with a infamous wizard who lives on the outskirts of town, and it goes through what happens after she starts living with that wizard. This is a classic, and I definitely recommend this if you have kids, or even as an adult if you love fantasy stories. We also read A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. This was another one that I read before bedtime. This book was famous when I was a kid, and I had never read it, and I see that it lives up to its hype. It's such a unique story. It's about a group of siblings and their friend who go traveling through time and space to save the universe from an evil force. The kids have certain sensitivities that make them suited for the task, and they are helped by these magical powers that come in the form of Mrs. Witch, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. What's-It. It's all very original and very unique, and we really loved this, so I would recommend this if you have kids. Or even if you haven't read it before, I think that this can hold up as an adult reading book as well. My kids and I also listened to Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's Library this year by Chris Grabenstein. This is a story about a group of kids in Ohio who enter a contest where they have to escape from this library using their reading skills, their reading knowledge, and almost like video game skills. It's so geared toward kids who love both reading and video games. For me as an adult, I don't think it would have held my interest by myself to read it, but my kids absolutely loved every aspect of it. They loved the silliness, they loved the cool features of Mr. Lemoncello's library. They loved how the kids used their skills to get out of the library. So if you're reading this with kids, I definitely recommend Mr. Lemoncello's Library. My kids and I also listened to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by J.K. Rowling. Last year we had listened to the entire Harry Potter series in the car throughout the year, and we wanted to continue in that world. Fantastic Beasts is actually more of an encyclopedia. I would not recommend listening to this on audiobook. I would recommend owning it if you are a Harry Potter fan, because it references animals that are in the books. I would not recommend it if you are not a fan of Harry Potter to begin with. Continuing with the same author, we listened to The Ichabod by J.K. Rowling, and this story is an allegory about lying and the consequences of lying, how lies can get out of control, and why it's important to have responsibility for your actions and how they affect others. I thought with all of the lessons that were included in this book that it might be a little too on the nose for the kids to enjoy, but they actually loved it and they still talk about it to this day. I think that they loved the way that the story was told in the audiobook as well. So I would definitely recommend The Ichabod if you have kids and listening to the audiobook version. Moving on to books that I read for myself. This year, I read the first 3 volumes in the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman, Preludes and Nocturnes, The Doll's House, and Dream Country. I am a big fan of Neil Gaiman's work, which is what led me to read this. The Sandman is about a group of siblings that are ancient beings called the Endless, and one of them is the Sandman, and he's also called Dream. He controls the realm of dreams, and at the beginning of the series, he is kidnapped and held hostage, and chaos ensues because the dream land is ungoverned. I love the premise for this. It's definitely the type of story that I usually enjoy, and I did enjoy aspects of it, but a lot of the stories get very gory and definitely into pure horror rather than fantasy, which is not my preferred genre to read. So I would not recommend The Sandman unless you really enjoy reading horror. I read the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb, which is Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and Assassin's Quest. This is a trilogy within an entire world that Robin Hobb has written. I forget how many books there are in total. This series is about a young boy who is the son of a prince. He is not acknowledged by his father and he doesn't know who his mother is, but he lives in the palace in the stable, and he is raised by the stable master, and then eventually he becomes an assassin for the king. It's about his story growing up, and the way this is written, it almost feels like you are living day to day with the characters. You really see this person grow up and become who he is. I love this series. I would recommend this to anyone who loves epic fantasy. One of the shortest books I read this year was The Summer War by Naomi Novik. This is only 127 pages long. This book is about a young witch who accidentally curses her brother and has to find out how to undo the spell. But the story is really about family and how expectations or your role within your family can affect who you become, and it can affect your happiness in your life and how you can overcome that. At least that's what I got out of it. I really love Naomi Novik's writing, and her way of writing a fairy tale that is so much more than a fairy tale, I do recommend this. I read the Aporson trilogy by Garth Nix. I think this is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time now, trilogies of all time. This series is about a world where there is a magicless section and a section with magic. There is a wizard called the Aporson. When that person dies, the Aporson title passes on to someone else. Most often know who it's going to pass on to. So it's about a girl whose father is the Aporson and she finds him missing, has to find him. How she comes into her own as the Aporson eventually. There is also a middle novel about another girl who is living in a place where she doesn't belong or doesn't feel she belongs, but then she finds her place in the world as well as a powerful person. There is a character in that middle novel called the Disreputable Dog. It's a very unique character. It's a powerful being in the form of a dog who helps Lyriel in her journey. I recommend this even if you're not usually into fantasy because I think it is accessible enough that anyone would love it. I've been listening to the series Aragon by Christopher Paolini. I'm on the second novel right now and I listened to Aragon last year. I actually listened to this while I was stripping the paint in my living room and it's always going to be tied up with that in my mind. This story is about a boy who discovers a dragon egg and he becomes a dragon rider. It has a lot of similarities to the Lord of the Rings. There are elves and dragons and a quest, a lot of things that just feel like the Lord of the Rings, but it's written for a younger audience and I think it's a lot easier to read. So if you like that type of stories, you will love this. I do recommend Aragon. I also read House of Flame and Shadow, which is the third book in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. I love Sarah J. Maas books. I loved A Court of Thorns and Roses, the whole series. I loved the Throne of Glass series. I enjoy this because I like the way that Sarah J. Maas writes, but I think that for me, the amount of characters in these books and the length of the books, I heard someone say recently that a book didn't earn its pages, and I feel that way about Crescent City. I think it's just too long and there are too many threads that it just gets confusing, and it is fun how things come together, but by the end you're forgetting the different threads because there are too many going into it. So I would not recommend this unless you're a super fan of Sarah J. Maas and you want to read anything that she writes. I think it's just too long. I think the only nonfiction book I read this year was Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I have seen quotes from this book for years and that's what made me want to read it. I love writing memoirs by authors that talk about their craft and their creativity, or really any successful artist that writes a book about creativity. I really enjoy that type of book. So I would recommend this if you are any type of creative person. I wanted to read poetry this year. I had seen a lot of quotes online on Instagram and Pinterest by Mary Oliver, so I kind of knew ahead of time that she was a writer who I would enjoy. I read Dreamwork and I read American Primitive. I like Mary Oliver's poetry because it's accessible. It's written in plain enough language that anyone could enjoy it. A lot of her writing is about nature and life and aging, being a part of the natural world, and that's something that I really appreciate as someone who likes to spend a lot of time in nature and grew up and still live in a more rural area. I could identify with a lot of the things that she talks about and describes in such a beautiful way. So I do recommend Mary Oliver to anyone who wants to read poetry, even if you're not really a poetry expert. I read The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, and I didn't want to sound ignorant in my review of it, so I looked up what it was supposed to be about. It says The Sun Also Rises captures the existential disillusionment characteristic of the lost generation. Its main characters, Jake, Brett, and their acquaintances, are mentally, emotionally, and morally lost. Their lives lack meaningful foundations and their romantic attachments are fleeting. The meaning of this book is maybe lost with the lost generation. There is anti-Semitism in this book, and The characters are not likable at all. Not that they are meant to be likable, but all that they do is drink and cheat on each other and party, and I just did not enjoy this. Would not recommend this book. This is a series of stories about a girl growing up in a poor neighborhood in Chicago. Her neighborhood is one of harsh realities and harsh beauty. Esperanza doesn't want to belong to her rundown neighborhood or to the low expectations the world has for her. I thought that there was a sense that she wanted to belong and she didn't. She loved her family and community members, but there were also ones whose lives were very sad, and she was always noticing the disparities in economic status within her neighborhood and without. There was a lot of juxtaposition of those feelings within the story. A child's observations, I think that can be really powerful because they see things so plainly. Can see why this is a classic for that reason. I read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Folk tale almost about how you can discover your personal legend, the thing that the universe is leading you to become, your deepest desire. It follows a boy and he has an idea of what he wants his life to be, but he keeps having different things come into his life that seemingly take him off the path, but eventually he is led to his personal legend. And it's about how the universe can help us in unexpected ways to reach what we want. It reminds me of the idea of manifesting or the law of attraction. I love this idea of the universe conspiring to help us if we help ourselves and if we take every opportunity that comes to us, learn from every situation that we're in. I think it's a very hopeful and positive way of looking at the world and looking at life. So I enjoyed this and I do recommend The Alchemist. I read A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. You can see this is a very short book. It is only 104 pages long. This book was about a man who just fought in World War I. He has separated from his wife and he is going to a church in the country to uncover a fresco. There are elements of the healing power of art, the healing power of friendship, and of a quiet life. It was a very restful book to read. It's set in the month of August, I believe, so it was kind of nice to read in the summer. It's just a very soft, easygoing story, but you don't feel bored by it. There's not really a big plot. This man is looking back on that summer as transformative, although maybe it didn't feel like that at the time. I do recommend A Month in the Country. I read Wilderness Tips by Margaret Atwood. This is a collection of short stories published in 1991. I think that short stories are the most underrated form of literature. The theme and the message needs to get across in just a small amount of time, and I actually think they seem harder to write than an entire novel because you really have to be selective with what you include and get your point across in just a few interactions or descriptions. The theme that goes throughout this book is the conflation of women's bodies with wilderness, and after reading that, I understood how that fit in, although I didn't quite catch it while I was reading. I would recommend Wilderness Tips by Margaret Atwood. I read Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I am a fan of Taylor Jenkins Reid. I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six. Loved those. I also read Carrie Soto is Back, which is about a tennis star, and this kind of ties in with the same characters. I did enjoy this. I don't think it's her best work, but I would recommend this if you would like a short, easy read. This is like a perfect beach read. I read Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. I felt like this book had the same feeling that a Wes Anderson movie has. I also really enjoyed the movie, although I thought the book was a lot funnier than the movie, and the movie felt a lot more dark. I would read this again because I just really enjoyed it. It was about a mother who is very smart and was successful in the past, but is kind of running away from past failures, and now her life is kind of a disaster. Her marriage, her home physically, and the thing that she does the best is raising her daughter. It was a very satisfying ending where she is choosing herself for a while, and that is kind of fixing a lot of problems in her life. I definitely recommend Where'd You Go, Bernadette. I reread The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown because I hadn't read this in years. It's about a murder that occurs, and the man who is murdered leaves clues to an ancient mystery that his niece must solve. I remembered really loving this, and I wanted to see if it held up. I would say that it did and it didn't. I can see why I liked it in the first place, but I think a lot of the reason that I liked it was because I didn't know the answers to the mysteries. Knowing them now and reading it again, it isn't really the same experience. So I would only recommend this book if you've never read it before. I read Kitchens of the Great Midwest by J. Ryan Stradle. This book is about a woman who has what's described as a once-in-a-lifetime palate. She is a foodie, and she becomes a famous and mysterious chef behind these kind of pop-up dinners. I think that this book was trying to catch a moment in time in foodie culture. I remember enjoying this when I read this, but I actually can barely remember what it was about. So I would not recommend this book for that reason, is that it wasn't memorable to me. I read The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This book has gotten a lot of hype, and it's now either a movie or a show, but I haven't watched, obviously. I really enjoyed this. It was really fun. It was a mystery, a murder mystery solved by people living in a retirement home in their 80s and 90s. And I really liked that it was a story about people of those ages having a rich, exciting, fun life. I think that that is rare to read about, and I would recommend this. I read A Man Called Ove by Richard Bachman. This book was about a grumpy older man who kind of wreaks havoc in his neighborhood by making all of his neighbors follow some ridiculous rules, and he has an enmity with another neighbor that he used to be friends with. And then a new neighbor who moves into the neighborhood ends up kind of forcing him to be her friend and friends with her family, and she in the process discovers kind of why he is the way that he is and helps him overcome the grief of his wife passing. It's a really beautiful story about how being a friend and a neighbor can have more impact than we think. That community can be really important in people's lives and maybe even save people's lives, and I believe that that is true. So I would recommend A Man Called Ove. I read Where the Heart Is by Billy Letts, and I read this because I had loved the movie with Natalie Portman when I was younger. This book is about a 17-year-old girl who is pregnant, and she is left by her boyfriend, who is a loser, at a Walmart, and he leaves without her, and she's left with almost nothing. And she's kind of helped out by people in the community that she's left in until she is able to build a life for herself. I loved this book because it was about people who maybe are not successful to the outside world. They love their lives, even if they are not perfect, or even though they're also different from each other. They build these strong friendships that help them to get through life's ups and downs. There are some hard to read parts of this book, so definitely look up trigger warnings, but I would recommend Where the Heart Is. I read Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghosts by Kate Rakulia. This book is about a girl who gets fired from her job, and she happens to get involved in solving the mystery behind a famous man's death. And he kind of sets up riddles for the whole city to find. Along the way, she makes new friends, and she ends up finding a new life path. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it would be more about actual ghosts, but it was more about the ghosts of the past. So I would recommend this book if you like a mystery. I had the absolute pleasure of reading The Secret History, The Goldfinch, and The Little Friend by Donna Tartt this year. I am a super fan for life now of Donna Tartt. First, I read The Secret History, which is about a group of college students and it involves a murder. In addition to building really unique characters that you, especially the protagonists, which you are completely involved in their inner world and seeing how they feel about things and how they're reacting. Donna Tartt has a way of building a setting and a vibe that is like nothing else. The Secret History is considered one of the first, if not the first, dark academia novel, and she perfectly captures that feeling. I would recommend The Secret History. The Goldfinch is probably my favorite of the two. It is about a boy who steals something very valuable. I'm not sure if I can give a spoiler for this. He has to deal with the repercussions of that for a good chunk of his life. Characters in this story, it's not that they're all likable because many of them are very flawed. It's like you know them as real people. One of the characters in this book, Hobie, who is an antiques dealer and an antiques restorer, is one of my favorite characters in all of fiction, and I wish that I could go and be his apprentice. I would recommend The Goldfinch. The Little Friend is, I think, the least popular of Donna Tartt's novels, and even though all of her books have what could be considered triggers, this was the one that I thought needs the most trigger warnings. It just had a lot of really hard to read scenarios, and it starts off with a child dying in a horrific way and the repercussions of that on his mother and his family. And as a mother, that was very difficult for me to be in the right frame of mind to read. So I kind of waited until I was feeling very emotionally strong to read this book, and it was hard to read as I expected. There were also very good parts of it. The way that she creates a setting is very special. This is set in Mississippi. There is a strong element of snakes, and that's all I'm going to say, but it's just something I will never ever forget. She also explores how our idea of people can run away with us to the point that we may form an entire opinion of someone that is based on the wrong premises, and you don't get the conclusion of that lesson until almost the very last page of the book. I am glad that I read it, but I would not recommend The Little Friend. This is getting to be a long video, so if you're still with me, you either really love books or you are just leaving your video on. So either way, thank you, and I'm gonna try to get through the other ones quickly. I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a science fiction novel set in a hypothetical past in England, and it's exploring the ethics of a hypothetical medical advancement. It is sad. It has a melancholy feeling throughout, but it's not the type of sad situation that you don't see coming. You kind of feel it and understand the entire time that it's not necessarily going to have a happy ending, but it is posing a question to you that will make you think. So I think it's very interesting, and while I don't usually love to read things that are very sad, I enjoyed this book and I would recommend it. I read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and this book is about a group of video game programmers who are friends and grow up together and build businesses together, and the different ways their relationships fluctuate throughout that time. I loved this book because I like books that delve into the technicalities of a certain career that maybe you had never thought of exploring before or never had a reason to know about, and it just made me think about video games in a different way, and it sparked conversations with my husband and my son about video games that were kind of fun. I just really enjoyed that aspect of learning that this book gave me. I thought it felt very true to life, and I would recommend this book. I read All the Water in the World by Erin Caffel. This book is about a dystopian future where increasingly worsening weather events occur to the point that there is a great flood that destroys much of New York City. It is written from the perspective of a child who is living with her family and what's left of their friends in the Museum of Natural History. until another flood happens, and then they are forced to go upstate and escape the city and find a safe place to live. I actually listened to this book while I was clearing things in the yard during the spring. We were clearing brush, and I will always have it tied up with that. It was kind of perfect to read it while I was outside working in nature, because a lot of it is about nature and the way that we as humans depend on the natural world. It was also about humans and civilization and compassion, and how compassion survives when civilization is gone. I would recommend this book. I read Moonbound by Robin Sloan. I've read other books by Robin Sloan, including Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore and Sourdough, and I really enjoyed those. This book was a science fiction book set far in the future, and humankind as it is now is unrecognizable. It is a very kooky story with aspects that are so unbelievable and almost silly that I kind of found myself taken out of the story at times. So I personally would not recommend this book unless you are a fan of really kooky science fiction. I read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and this is another one where you should look up trigger warnings before you read it, but it is about a woman who wants to end her life because she doesn't feel like she is fulfilled or happy in any way, and she thinks that if she made different choices in her life, then she would be more happy. And it explores maybe what those different choices in her life would have turned out as if she went down those paths. And I really, really like the ending. I wasn't sure that I was going to like this book. I felt like it all hinged on what the ending was. But once I read the ending, I was really pleased with the message that the book was sending. And I thought that it was very realistic and hopeful at the same time. I would recommend The Midnight Library. I read Gifted and Talented by Olivia Blake. Gifted and Talented is about a group of siblings, and they all have different proclivities or powers that help them in life, and they are from a wealthy family, and an exploration of class differences, as well as just a story about people with magical powers. And I think that it is interesting, but I did not enjoy it, and I should have DNF'd it. So I would not recommend Gifted and Talented. I read Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This book is about a girl who is trying to pursue her true love, and in the process, she makes a deal with a possibly evil force called the Prince of Hearts, and he is one of the fates in this world. This book felt very juvenile to me. I believe it is young adult, but it felt so unreadable for an adult that I really didn't enjoy it, and I wish I DNF'd it. So I would not recommend Once Upon a Broken Heart. I read 4 books by Kristen Hanna this year. I had read The Women by her, and that is about a woman who goes to serve in the Vietnam War, and about the other women she serves with. I really enjoyed this book. I thought that I learned a lot about the Vietnam War that I didn't know before, and it just gave a different perspective, obviously focusing on the women who were involved in the war, and I thought that was very interesting. Then I read 3 more of her books: True Colors, Homefront, and Firefly Lane. After reading 4 Kristen Hanna books in a row, I decided that I wasn't a fan of the way that she kind of uses tragedies as a way to move the stories forward. I feel like she does it too often for my taste. It seems like every story has one or multiple terrible tragedies that are kind of gratuitously put in there. She does do a really great job of creating a setting for her stories, and they're all really unique and different. I would recommend The Women, and I would not recommend True Colors, Firefly Lane, and Homefront. The last series of books that I read were The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. These were some of my favorites of the year, and they were also one of the reasons I met my goal, because I started reading these in December and I was a little bit behind on my goal, and the books are so short and easy to read that I was able to just get I don't remember if I read 4 or 5. One of them I read in one day. They cover 2 months of Emma's life. It's set in 1883. She is an orphan and she has a complicated financial situation going on. It reminds me of Jane Austen, but a lot funnier and more direct. The protagonist is so funny and wry. I just really enjoy hearing the story from her perspective because she has comical commentary the entire time. Brower has said she's going to write 20 something of these, and there are only 8 currently out, so keep that in mind if you're going to read these. I would recommend Emma M. Lyon to anyone. Unless I missed some, that is the entirety of the books that I read last year. I think that this was a very well-rounded reading year. I read some books that are considered classics. I read a little bit of nonfiction, a little bit of philosophy. I read heavily in my favorite genre, which is fantasy. I read a lot of books with the kids, which is always one of my goals. And I read some poetry. And for 2026, I hope to continue to read some more classics, definitely more fantasy. There are some series that I want to finish up, like the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik, and I want to continue reading in the Farseer universe by Robin Hobb. I definitely want to read more poetry. There are some nonfiction books on creativity I want to read, like The Artist's Way. And of course, I want to continue listening to and reading aloud books with my kids. Again, my goal is not necessarily the number. It's more about continuously reading throughout the year and making sure that I don't fall into a reading slump. I hope that you also have a great reading year, and if you have any books that you think that I might enjoy this year, please leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching.